Well, hello there and welcome to the show. Eric Peters joins me as he does each Tuesday here on the program. Eric, great to catch up with you. Heard anything exciting or interesting lately?
Yeah, apparently we're on the cusp of the age of disclosure. Do you want to start with that?
Let's do. I know we were going to talk about Trump at some point, but yeah, I saw a tweet this morning that the commander in chief has been briefed on some extraterrestrial goings on, but I think you have more details on this than I do.
Well, a little bit. Apparently, there is a movie that's either out or about to be released in theaters called The Age of Disclosure. That's kind of a documentary about this whole phenomenon. And supposedly, it dovetails with a pending announcement by Trump that we are not alone, that he's going to be the president to disclose what we've all been waiting decades to find out, whether indeed something actually did crash at Roswell that was not of this earth, and what exactly the government has been up to. Now, I'm as interested as anybody else in that. And of course, it will have the happy effect for Trump of getting people to shut up about inflation, Epstein, MGT, and everything else
Right.
setting his presidency.
Yeah, well, can we say distraction? Are we allowed to notice the distractions? I know there's some things we're not supposed to notice, but that sure seems like a great way to get everybody's minds off all the corruption, the political infighting. Oh, a MAGA civil war, for instance. That
Yep.
should do it.
Yep. This MGT thing is really interesting. There have been a variety of ideas put forward as to why did she suddenly quit? Why did she decide that she's going to withdraw from Congress? I think the most persuasive reason, other than the gun being put to her head potentially to get out of there, is that she doesn't want to be around when this whole thing comes undone. I think she
That was my
realizes,
reaction exactly
yeah,
was she's getting out while it's good.
and that's a smart move. It's also the right move, frankly. I would have been disappointed with her if she'd kowtowed and fallen in line. I think that's one of the reasons why Trump has kind of gone off the rails. There's so many people around him, and frankly, there's so many people in MAGA who are willing to rationalize countenance, explain away things that they ought not to put up with. There are lines that should not be crossed, and when they're crossed, you have to call them out. And I personally thought it was just outrageous for him to call, of all people, Marjorie Taylor Greene a traitor. Simply
Right. And
for
keep
voting
calling
for.
her that.
Yeah, I mean, this is the person who was probably the most ardent supporter of Trump for years. And oh, she had the temerity, the effrontery to vote in favor of releasing whatever information the government is holding about this Epstein stuff. Reasonable. And we want to know what the heck is going on and who's involved. And everybody, I think, well, not everybody, but I think a lot of people are deeply troubled by Trump's response and the way he's been handling this. So anyway, Godspeed to MGT. Good for her. I think she did the right thing.
Yeah, I the first thing I thought when I heard that she had resigned, first I was like, "Holy cow, this must be much worse than I thought." But like you, I thought about it and went, "You know what? She probably knows some things I don't know." But actually, I have heard that there are other fairly high-profile GOP lawmakers there in DC that are likewise considering resigning after the first of the year. I guess we'll see. But tell me what your thoughts are in terms of I know that there is a diehard believer core in MAGA, that to whom Trump can do no wrong, but there's an awful lot of people out there who voted for him, who nonetheless still have a sense of right and wrong, and when
Yeah.
they see him cross that line, are we because we voted for him? Are we duty bound to shut up and just go along with it?
Well, I don't think so. And purely on a pragmatic level, it's disastrous. I saw something, I think it may have been on InfoWars or another site like that. I don't know whether it's actually correct, but it said that Trump's approval rating among Republicans has never been higher, like to the extent of 80
Yeah,
something, which may be true. But, the problem is that that's blinkered. How that constitutes a sliver of the overall electorate. Trump is alienating vast swaths of the electorate, in particular young people who I think were very important to his reelection. And the harbinger of this that I think supports what I'm saying, the recent elections at the state level, that we experienced a couple of weeks ago, which were blowouts for the Republican candidates. And I think that a lot of that was a kind of backlash against the way Trump has been handling things lately, particularly with regard to the economy. People are hurting badly, and they are tired of being told there's no inflation. They're tired of seeing big corporations and Wall Street entities rake in tremendous amounts of money while they're having trouble literally paying their utility bills, and forget of buying a new car. New car has become kind of a luxury item for people. And I think that for them to not to understand and see this is going to be disaster of epic proportions come, we're almost at 2026. The midterms are just, what, 10, 11 months away from now, not that long. And what happens when Trump loses both houses of Congress, which is a distinct possibility? And what if it's a blowout there? What if it's a mass repudiation of MAGA and Trump becomes basically politically impotent at that point and they hound him out of office, which they could? They impeached him last time. This time they might actually do it for real and not just in the paperwork sense.
And there's a where was I reading about this? California, I think, is seeing a trend. A friend sent me this yesterday. It was somebody had received Christmas cards in a neighborhood in California. Leftists wearing masks went out and basically accusing their neighbors of being Nazis and saying, "Hey, I want a Nazi head under my Christmas tree, Santa." And I think this does not portend that we're headed for a good place.
No, Trump, his behavior is, to put it mildly, not apropos for the moment. If he had any sense, in my opinion, he would be expressing concern and sympathy genuinely for the way middle Americans and working income Americans are hurting right now, and making it clear that he's going to take steps to make things better for them. We don't need another George Bush presidency. Going to war, and of all places, Venezuela. He's, because we're threatened by narco terrorists. No, we're not. We're threatened by, the loss of our standard of living, our ability to buy groceries. That's what people care about. Nobody cares at all about these so-called narco terrorists in Venezuela. Nobody cares, or people do care, but not in the sense Trump would like, about what's going on over in the Middle East. They're sick to death of it. The whole point of voting for Trump was to end that and refocus the attention of the federal government on Americans, not foreigners.
Yeah, last time I checked, it wasn't the narco terrorists that were fleecing me of, anywhere from 33% to a half of my income, and then turning around and taking that money from me and using it to build a cage for me. Now, it's a
100%.
nice cage, but it's still a cage, and I don't want to live in it.
100%. It's as if, once again, you vote for Trump and you end up with John McCain or George Bush. These neocons are somehow once again at the helm, apparently directing these operations that entail just funneling more money to the military industrial complex, as they put it. And we're paying for that. We're paying for that literally and in also other ways. It's not that we can afford this anymore. It's not, it's not 1960 anymore. Things are in bad shape in this country. I was watching a video the other day, and I recommend people do this also, of an airport in China, in Beijing. I can't remember the name of it. And it was of a piece with other videos that I've watched of the infrastructure in China, of their trains and their public buildings, and they're clean and they're modern. They look so nice. There's no garbage everywhere. There aren't derelicts lying in the street. Now, granted, maybe that's not a representative slice of what things are really like in China, but at the same time, things look a lot better over there than they look in America's cities at this point, at America's airports, America's subways, which are just like decaying, awful, filled with dirt, and they're not safe. People get attacked in these things. These are the sorts of things that Trump ran on to fix. And he's lost focus on that. And he's focused on all these other things that people don't have the luxury anymore to care about.
So let's shift gears here just a little bit, and let's talk about everything is in a state of change. We're constantly in a state of flux. It took me a long time to figure out nothing is going to stay the same forever, and finally I accepted it, and life became a lot easier. But some of the changes we just don't see until they're actually a little ways behind us, and this is particularly true when it comes to cars or automotive technology or even companies. You had a great article called Deadpool 2, or get Deadpool 2026 rather. Talk to me about who's not likely to be around this time next year.
What you say about change happening fast is true, and it's happening faster than ever. That's, I think, one of the great difficulties of our time, is just keeping your head from going on a swivel constantly, because things do move so rapidly. But because of everything that's occurred over the last several years, with regard particularly to this whole EV thing that really got pushing hard about 4 or 5 years ago, I think that a number of brands are on the ropes, and I decided to do a list of the top 3 contenders that I think might not be around for much longer. And at the head of the list is Chrysler, which is sadly down to selling one model at this point, which is a minivan, the Pacifica. That's all they've got. If you went to a Chrysler store, you'd see a minivan. That's it. They no longer sell the 300, which is a tragedy. The 300 was the Chrysler version of the Dodge Charger, and it was more luxurious and nicer. And the point was, it was a way for Americans to get into something that was comparable, better than, in my opinion, in a lot of ways, a Mercedes E-Class or a BMW 5 Series for literally $20,000 less. It was a great car, sold
Wow.
well. It sold really well. Remember, you see 300s everywhere, even today. But then Stellantis, which is the parent company of Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, and Ram, decided to be politically correct and compliant and decided to pull the engines out of pretty much all of their popular vehicles, including the Charger, which became an electric car. And by dint of that, the 300 went away, and they had on deck a replacement that was electric. And of course, they decided not to run with that because the Charger debacle has been one of the worst belly flops since the Edsel launch back in the late 1950s. I mean, an unmitigated disaster. That brings us to Dodge. They're desperately trying to undo the damage that was done by just gutting their brand, getting rid of the Charger four-door and the Challenger two-door, and bringing out this electric two-door Charger that not only was electric, but on top of that was $20,000 more expensive than the previous Charger. So naturally, people stopped buying them. Well, now they're trying to put in an engine. They're trying to put a six-cylinder engine in the Dodge Charger. Problem is, it's still $20,000 is more expensive than the last Charger. So I just don't think that's going to work. How many people have got the money to say, "Oh yeah, sure, I'll cut a check for $20,000 more"? It's not tenable. And then the other thing they've got is this little Hornet crossover that just hasn't sold very well, and they're going to cancel it for 2026 because it's not selling. So what does that leave them? A too expensive two-door Charger. By the way, that was a disaster to do that because it's a two-door. Remember when all the
Right.
cop cars used to be four-door Chargers?
Oh yeah.
Dodge made a bunch of money selling fleets of those things to cop shops all over the country. A two-door doesn't work for that purpose. That's just
No.
not going to happen. So they've lost the fleet market, and they're probably going to lose the rest of the market too, because how many people can indulge a $50,000 something two-door, inherently impractical car? It's a fun car maybe, but 50 grand for a two-door, it's not going to go. So I think Dodge, unless they figure out a way to come around, is in trouble. Volkswagen, which is the world's largest car company overall, because it owns a number of brands, not just Volkswagen. Um, but they also bought in hugely to this whole electrification agenda. And that has been an absolute disaster for them. You're seeing a pattern here. They came out with models like this ID Buzz, which we have talked about before, which was sort of a resurrected electric version of their classic microbus for $60,000 to start. There are only so many aging boomers with $60,000
Right.
available to revisit their hippie youth.
Let
It,
alone young hippies with that kind of scratch.
yeah, this whole thing, it's not working, but they still haven't learned. They recently decided that they were going to double down on this and invest hundreds of millions of dollars in Scout. Remember Scout, International Scout? Well, that
Absolutely.
existed for a long time, but they bought the rights to the Scout name, which they're going to use to try to market basically another Rivian, an electric SUV that's going to start around $60,000, they say, in 2028. Again, I mean, they're delusional, and they better fix it because their profits are just winnowing as the sales are winnowing in tandem. And anybody can see that this isn't good. It's metastatic cancer, and it's time for them to get some chemo pronto.
Let's talk headlights for a moment. I noticed you had done an article on this, and if there is one complaint that I hear regularly from my wife and from my daughter, strangely not from my boys though, they can't see when
Mhm.
cars are coming toward them at night. And it's the new cars, it's the new headlights. There is a huge difference. I mean, of course, I'm driving around with 1990s technology headlights, but talk to me about old versus new. There definitely is a difference. I see it too, but it seems like it's actually blinding, literally,
Yeah,
for some
it is.
people.
I've had a lot of people contact me to complain about the glare, the brightness of modern lighting systems, which is what they are. They're not just headlights anymore, they're lighting systems, typically LED or something along that line. And they are very complex pieces of technology. It's like having a flamethrower almost in front of you. And I get that it's nice to be able to see, half a mile down the road. But at the same time, if there's somebody coming at you, it blinds their retinas. And most of these systems do have an automatic dimming function. The problem is that
Mhm.
there's a lag with that, and we've gotten lazy about that. You and I, we grew up when you had to manually dim. And you could anticipate, because once again, this is interesting, the human brain versus the AI or the electronic brain. you could anticipate because you could tell that there was another car coming, even though it hadn't yet gotten close enough for a sensor to detect it. And you would then dim your headlights in anticipation so that when that car came at you, your lights were already dimmer, so you didn't blind the other person. It was a courtesy. Now people rely on the technology to do that. The problem is that it takes a little longer. That car comes around the bend, and it's already pointed at you, and that's when the thing dims. But by that time, the other driver has already been blinded by the light, so to speak. Now, my position on this is pretty much the same as yours. Driving 1990s or even older vehicles with just halogen headlights, my eyes are okay, so I can see perfectly adequately. And I think that we might have been better off with that. I think it's been oversold and overhyped. I think if your vision is poor, maybe go get better glasses, or something along those lines. And another aspect of this that I think people should take into consideration is the expense, which is enormous. Even today, with inflation and everything else, I can go out and buy a sealed beam headlight replacement for my car for about 25 or $30. Whereas, if you're going to replace an LED headlamp assembly in some cars, it's 400, 500, $800 even or more for one of those things. And you'll think, well, I'll be careful. I'm not going to break it. Well, what if you do? Your insurance company's thinking about that. One of the reasons that insurance costs have gotten so high is because these items have become so expensive to replace and repair. Little fender bender in the parking lot can now be thousands of dollars worth of damage. And part of that are these LED headlight assemblies, very fragile, very exposed because we don't have bumpers anymore. We've got rubber fascias, and all this stuff is just sort of projecting out there. And all it takes is a shopping cart to bump into it, and that's it. And now you're looking at $400 to replace one of these headlight assemblies. And my argument is it worth it on balance? Is the benefit of these, does the benefit outweigh the costs? I don't know. I don't think that they do.
Going back to the sensors, that dim the headlights. Um, I think back to something you and I've talked about a number of times, and that is the good drivers out there are the ones whose heads are in the game. And look, I'm patting myself on the back as I say this, but that's one of those areas where I'm extremely conscious when I'm driving and my head is in the game. When my high beams are on, if I detect, if my detectors see another car approaching before its headlights are visible to me, I'll dim mine, because my head is in the game and I'm paying attention. And like you put it, it's a courtesy.
Yeah.
I just want to be courteous to the other drivers. Sometimes they will be. My wife flashed a vehicle the other day that wouldn't dim its brights. It was a cop. he flipped on his lights after he went past us. We were like, oh, great. But
This
he
is a
just kept
really
on going.
important point, and I think it's one that is a general point. For example, most new cars have some form of adaptive or automatic cruise control that maintains following distance between you and other cars. I don't like that. I think it's offloading a responsibility that should be the driver's responsibility to pay attention to the ebb and flow of traffic. And if the car ahead of you slows down, well, I think it's the driver's responsibility to slow the car down. I don't think it's a good idea to encourage people to zone out by turning over all of these responsibilities to technology.
It's you have your head in the game. You're probably going to be okay. Although, gosh, we may have to save this one for next week because we're coming up against the clock here. I have heard rumbles, and I'm sure you have too, because of who you are and what you write about, that the self-driving technology, Tesla, I think showboats it the most, but there are other companies that are doing that. But I'm hearing rumors that we're on the cusp of, people's minds are going to break because cars will be self-driving, in the not too distant future, or something to that effect. That self-driving technology is going to kind of tip the table on us.
Well, they've been saying that for a number of years, and effectively, they already are. There are a number of vehicles that offer this tech, and I've had the opportunity to use it myself and to try it. And yeah, it's very impressive. Particularly if you, like me, grew up before any of this was around, and the human behind the wheel had to be in full control of the vehicle. Yeah, you can push the button, and it's remarkable. The thing will track on the road, and it will go around a corner. You can even get it to turn off or punch in a destination, and the thing will use the GPS and so on to do that. But it's not infallible, and that's a really, really important point. Technology is made by humans. Humans are fallible. They operate. The systems operate on programming, and sometimes the programming can't cope with a situation, and then you have a problem. And me personally, I'm a big fan of agency. If the car wrecks because of me, that's one thing. If it wrecks because of technology, it's another thing. Who's responsible when a self-driving car runs over a kid in the street?
Right.
And
right.
that's something really important to take it to think about. You know, we want to hold each other responsible for what we do, but when technology is quote unquote responsible, then nobody is responsible.
Yeah, that's I'm with you. I have a problem with that too. Hey, I'm sorry we didn't have time to talk about your excellent article about the original versus the new Bronco. Let's kick that one to next week. In the meantime, I'll encourage people go to your website ericpetersautos.com. Check this out for yourself. You find a lot of other great articles too. And Eric, as always, thank you for being a voice of sanity at a time when we really need one.
Thank you for having me on, Brian.